Hey, everybody, and welcome to our program to present the results of our survey on business perspectives on political backlash, along with our partners at Protect Democracy, who's going to share some insights and recommendations on how to navigate attacks on corporate speech. My name is Chip York. I'm the Marketing and Communications Director at Business for America, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to join us and really learn more about the current political environment and the impact that it's having on businesses as they prepare for potentially increased attacks and going into a very tumultuous 2024. But first, let me just briefly tell you who you're going to be hearing from today. So we have our founder and CEO, Sarah Bonk, otherwise known as Bonk from Business for America. I've introduced myself. We also have Richard Idlin, who is our National Policy Director at Business for America. And then our guests from Protect Democracy, Corey Dukes and Aisha Woodward, who's going to be sharing some of their work a little bit later in the program. So just a very quick review of the agenda. So Bonk's going to tell us a little bit about Business for America and how we arrived to this project and talk through the methodology of what went behind the survey and really why we were really excited to find out what the findings and takeaways and insights are going to be. And so I'm going to take you through that piece of it. And then we're going to invite our friends at Protect Democracy to take us through a deeper dive on elected officials and what's happening across the country and at the state level in terms of punishment of corporate speech, both from a legislative perspective as well as a PR perspective, honestly. And then we'll pause for Q&A at the end. So now I'm going to hand it over to Bonk, and she's going to take us through an overview of Business for America and some of our work. So over to you, Bonk.
Great. Thank you, Chip, and thank you everyone for joining us. So before we get to those survey results, I want to tell you about Business for America, and I wanted to keep it brief. So here are just 3 things about BFA. Number 1, Business for America is a nonpartisan business membership organization focused exclusively on the issue of democracy. And we have members from the Fortune 500 on down to small startups and with leaders who have a variety of political viewpoints. So if you are interested in joining, we invite you to contact us. Number 2, we help business leaders understand why our country's civic health is so important to their employees and communities, as well as to their bottom line. In our view, the future of our economy depends on the functioning of our democratic institutions. And we also help business leaders to engage and educate their employees as part of their commitment to civic health. And number 3, we mobilize companies to take coordinated action to help address the root causes of hyperpartisanship and dysfunction in our political system. We work on issues like voting rights, election integrity, civics education, modernizing Congress, building bipartisanship, and much more. You can learn more and reach out at Business for America. And now let's get into the real reason you're here, to find out about our survey and what we've learned about how businesses are coping as they find themselves in the crossfire of America's toxic politics. So at the root of the issue is America's dysfunctional hyperpartisan politics. And this is a result of many factors, of course. News being optimized for clicks, social media fueling online outrage, the echo chambers, the misinformation. Our election systems incentivize divisiveness with things like closed primaries, gerrymandering, etc. Our partisan politics reward extremism. And frankly, human nature, it generally is fairly tribalistic. So in the absence of leadership from our elected leaders, our employees and customers want companies to take a stand on a variety of social and political issues. Businesses, especially our own employers, are still considered to be one of the most trusted institutions, and what companies leaders say still does matter. So companies are dealing with pressure from all sides to do something, but they're also facing pressure to stop, and that pressure has only been growing lately. So companies are facing pressure from both the left and right. We are seeing employee pressure to do more and do less, public pressure from grassroots activists, civil society groups, shareholder activists, investors, etc. Consumer boycotts that lead to PR crises, often led by political figures. And finally, politicians passing laws and regulation to punish companies with viewpoints counter to their own. This is what we mean by backlash. So what is the result of all this growing pressure? It's a bit of chaos, and most of the stories we have on the screen here will be familiar to you. We could spend hours going through all the cases of business backlash, the attacks on corporate speech. The takeaway here is that backlash is growing and it's becoming more precarious for companies to take action on a variety of social and political issues that they and their stakeholders care about. And then last point here, we're now seeing that the backlash against business action is also appearing to be having an effect on public opinion. A recent Gallup poll found that just 2 out of 5 American adults support businesses weighing in on current events. That number has fallen drastically amid the recent wave of culture war clashes. And it's worth noting that among the younger generations, however, a majority do still support business taking a stance on current events. So with all that background, we at Business for America have been asking ourselves, what can we do to help our members and other civic-minded companies navigate this political environment in 2024 and beyond? We wanted to know, what's your viewpoint on the current political climate and culture wars? How is this backlash affecting your company's risk assessment and your social impact work? And finally, what resources would be the most helpful in navigating these issues? With those questions in mind, we did a survey. And we're excited to tell you all about what we learned. But before we do that, I want to point out more than 50 business leaders have shared their personal viewpoints with us. And it's important to note that they participated with the understanding that they were not speaking as official representatives of their companies. In fact, given the sensitive nature of the subject matter, several business leaders actually asked to have the survey invitation sent to their personal email address. This really underscores how challenging it is to engage business on these topics. So a big thanks goes to everyone who participated. And I also want to emphasize that this is not a scientifically randomized survey of the full business community. This survey represents a sample of the BFA network, so we can't say that the findings apply to the entire business sector. That being said, we do think the data are a very helpful indicator of business concerns, and we're really excited to share it with you. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Chip York, and he'll get into the nitty-gritty. Take it away, Chip.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Bonk, for laying the groundwork there and for really explaining, what precipitated this effort. So with that, who did we talk to and what did we learn? So our respondents came from a really diverse group of companies who represent over 3 million employees, substantial market contribution, and from over 50 respondents, 15 of those came from Fortune 500 companies, and 10 others lead their own mid to small size companies as owners and CEOs. You'll notice later as we present some of the data that we divided up the respondents between these 3 different sizes, so small, medium, and large, and you'll see kind of how we define those here. Respondents also, they work at companies whose products are in your kitchen, who power your home, who get you to where you want to go, where you shop, and also how you communicate. So we really wanted to make sure that we were talking to companies that really were geographically diverse, were even ideologically diverse, especially given the different industries that they came from. And then lastly, we heard from leaders in a variety of different roles who are particularly impacted and engaged when companies face backlash, and who often deal with a number of different stakeholders within their organizations. Most likely, these are the folks that make up the critical response teams that often have to deal with a lot of these issues and a lot of the backlash that companies either are facing or could potentially face. So let's get into, as Bonk said, the nitty-gritty. So we have 5 key takeaways that we're going to take you through. And the first is, an overwhelming majority agree that backlash is real, attacks are bad for business, and politicians are truly motivated by scoring political points. And so going a little bit deeper, so when we asked how they perceive the current political climate as it relates to the private sector, these are the top 4 responses. Leaders feel that attacks on business are driven by political agendas, and really without any regard for actually solving issues, and that they're really at an all-time high. We also heard that these attacks put our economy at a global disadvantage and negatively impact competition and free enterprise. And you can see that these were pretty overwhelming numbers. Then our takeaway number 2 is that, and this is no surprise to anybody, but political backlash is rattling companies who are most concerned about PR crises, government retaliation, and consumer boycotts. So let's dive into this a little bit deeper. So when it comes to government action or even retaliation, we asked business leaders, what issues do you feel are most vulnerable? We gave them a variety of topics to discuss, whether it be voting rights, whether it be racial justice, whether it be reproductive rights. But we have to say the three that really bubbled to the top, challenges to DE&I initiatives and diverse hiring and training practices, was really the top concern. So many companies have invested heavily in this area and have very strong convictions around all the efforts that they've made around diversity, equity, and inclusion. ESG and an ESG investing has also become a very trendy political target in certain circles. And this came in second place in terms of where companies see a potential area of attack. And then third, many business leaders expressed that their support of LGBTQ issues could make them vulnerable, especially considering the very high profile examples of consumer backlash that we've seen amidst the culture wars that we're experiencing right now. So around those issues, when we ask companies, what concerns you about taking actions on these issues that we just talked about, we asked, what was most concerning to internal constituencies about association with these topics? Is it pressure from employees? Is it from shareholder activists? Is it from lawmakers? Is it from consumers? And so really, topping the list shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, as nobody wants to be in a PR crisis. You really don't want to get that call. That's not a fun call to get from either your boss or from the C-suite, but it's a distraction and it takes up critical resources and it becomes an all hands on deck situation that you have to deal with, and it really distracts from your day-to-day job. The second biggest concern is about elected officials and those who could take retaliatory action against your company and your sector to score political points. And this could include policy changes, it could include regulation, it could include tax law. And you're going to hear a little bit more about this from our friends at Protect Democracy later in this program. And then rounding out the top three, we've seen consumer boycotts. They get a lot of press. They're often led by political figures or certain extremists on either side of the political spectrum, and these can actually hurt the bottom line of companies and damage their brand. And so a lot of arguments can be made about whether consumer boycotts work or not, but there are definitely examples of where it has, and that's definitely over 2/3 of companies have expressed concern in that area. So I showed you the numbers of people that said that they were concerned, but what's really interesting is that we gave the companies the option to answer if they are very concerned. And you'll see that more than 1/3 of companies of losing sleep over a PR crisis and feel that they have a target on their backs. And a good 1/5 of leaders feel that they are vulnerable to retaliatory action from lawmakers and are actively seeking to develop a defense. So we just thought that, when you really dive deep into the people that are super concerned about these issues, it's actually quite a significant number of business leaders. So takeaway number 3, although no companies reported pausing their social impact work entirely, many have adjusted their approach. We wanted to know how all of this backlash is impacting how companies approach their work on social causes. And notably, not a single respondent said that they significantly reduced their work, which came a bit of a surprise to us. But then conversely, nearly 20% of business leaders said that they are actually doubling down on their social impact work and are more determined than ever. But that being said, they might be doing it in a different way. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. About 2/3 of respondents said that they're staying the course, but then we did hear from about 13% that said that they are somewhat reducing their work for a number of reasons. And I'll show you some of the quotes that we got from some of the companies. So you'll see with a large advertising agency, it was about resources. So we have reduced our work due to cost cutting and budget measures. You see somebody from a mid-sized financial firm, we're just avoiding anything political to avoid backlash. So just kind of not putting their head in the sand, but just avoiding any potential toxic conversation. Then you have a large retailer that has said that they've reduced their work around these issues slightly, but they've just been much less public about it. So they, looked at their website, they looked at their messaging, they looked at their press releases, and just kind of maybe tweaking a little bit in terms of how they come out on these issues. Then you had a mid-sized beverage brand who said that they've watched, what's happened with their peers in the industry, and they've kind of readjusted a little bit about how they approach these issues. And then you had a CEO of a small tech startup that said that honestly they just avoid these issues out of fear of causing distraction amongst their teams, because they just need to be super focused on the tasks at hand. So then going into takeaway 4, we asked, this was about preparation, and generally large companies feel prepared for the backlash that they are either receiving or potentially could receive, whereas small to mid-sized companies really need some more support. And so overall, 17% of companies feel that they are not prepared. If anything happened, they'd be flying by the seat of their pants. About half of the companies feel like they have a rough plan in place and know how to engage or manage their key stakeholders, but admit that they really do have more work to do and really need to focus on this area, being prepared. And then a third feel like they're very prepared. But then when you break it down between large and mid-sized companies, you'll see that large companies, we actually had 0 say that they're not prepared. And this isn't that surprising, considering that large companies have the resources and the people to have crises and response teams. But with the small and medium-sized companies, you see that there's a good number that are not prepared and somewhat prepared, and they're really seeking advice and camaraderie with others to really learn and become more prepared as a goal. So that really leans into our last takeaway, which is in preparation for 2024, companies really want to learn from each other on best ways to navigate this very rapidly changing political environment. And so we developed a bit of a word cloud here in terms of the types of resources that they find will be helpful, and we give them a number of different options to choose from. And overwhelmingly, folks responded that they would benefit from being part of a private forum with other companies and people who are in similar positions as they are. So within this forum, best practices, case studies, policy briefings, messaging examples, they can all be shared within this forum. So as we move forward, I'm going to have Richard Eidlin, our National Policy Director, tell you about how we are putting all of these insights into action and invite you to be part of this forum.
Great. Thanks, Chip. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the call. So as Chip noted, there are a number of initiatives that companies expressed interest in being part of, but I wanted to focus here on the monthly private forum that Business for America is going to begin convening in December, on actually December 13th. And our plan is to hold a forum every month, second Wednesday of each month, and do that through the end of 2024. The purpose of this gathering is to bring companies together from different sectors of the economy and business leaders from a variety of roles to discuss and get a better understanding of the threats that those companies are facing from backlash and what they can do about it. So we wanted to have you think about the forum really as a brain trust, as a support network, as a collegial environment that will be run by Chatham House rules, meaning you can talk about the topics in the conversation, but just not attribute it to anyone. And those conversations on a monthly basis will also be closed to the press. So the participants will come, as I said, from a variety of sectors of the economy, from individual companies, large and small, and also from trade associations and maybe chambers of commerce. The format is going to be conversational, but also focused on learning. We really want this to be an opportunity for the participants to share their insights, to assess what's worked for them, what they've been challenged by, and to take a look at current events and trends, whether those trends are in social media or political trends at the state or federal level, and to get a better understanding of what some appropriate responses can be. One of the things I just want to point out here is that if you think about participating, we're happy to have more than one person per company. And we think it's important to have a mix of folks from different roles. So whether you're in government relations, work in social impact communications, DE&I, et cetera, there's probably something you will benefit from being part of this conversation. Each session will feature a content expert, as we're calling it. That is a person who has expertise in a given topic. So for instance, one of our sessions will focus on affirmative action, another might focus on ESG, and we will have that content expert who might be a journalist, might be from a think tank, maybe a former policymaker, a law firm, a strategic communications person, and he or she will present the issue at hand, the challenges, take some questions, and then they'll leave the conversation so that we can continue to have a frank and candid discussion among the participants. The idea, again, is to really share insights and resources, to look at what has been successful through maybe some case studies. And ideally, as we gather the insights, that may ladder up to some kind of toolkit that your individual company can use. Finally, we wanted companies to really think as they participate in this forum about what actions they can take to push back against backlash, to try to change some of the tone of the conversation that we anticipate will be challenging, to say the least, in 2024. So there are individual actions that your company may wish to take, but there is also the possibility for coordinated action when companies decide that there's an advantage in some collaborative messaging around an issue, maybe conversations with elected officials, participating, any other important methods of responding to this very challenging environment. So we're happy to talk to you. You can send us a note. My email is richard@ba.us. And before I introduce our colleagues from Protect Democracy, I wanted to encourage you all to go online today and download the report, and that's at bfa.us/backlash, and you will get access to that report. We do encourage you to give us your feedback on what you find useful, and certainly to contact us with your interest in being part of the private forum. Good, so thank you. So let me now introduce our colleagues from Protect Democracy. Protect Democracy is one of the most important organizations working in the democracy space. They're based in Washington, D.C., and they are a cross-ideological nonprofit anti-authoritarian group that's dedicated to defeating the authoritarian threat that our nation faces, building more resilient democratic institutions, and protecting our freedom. And we've worked with Protect Democracy on a number of initiatives. Corey, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks, Bonk. Thanks, Chip, for including us today. Thanks to everybody for joining. We're excited to share some of our latest work with you all, and also to hear from you. And I will say really quickly that there's several people in attendance here who were very helpful in shaping this work, and were really good sounding boards as we develop this work, and thought partners. So grateful to you all, and excited to share with you. So before we get into our presentation, a few words, and this will reiterate some of the things that Richard just said about us. Protect Democracy is a cross-partisan nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and strengthening our democracy while preventing a slide into a more authoritarian form of government. We focus on 4 broad strategies to further this goal. First, we protect elections against subversion to ensure that all votes are properly counted, regardless of who the winner is. Second, we defend the rule of law against authoritarian threats on the federal and state levels. We prevent disinformation from corrupting fact-based information sharing and debate. And then finally, we seek to shape the democracy of tomorrow by examining big picture reforms to the structures of our democracy. As Richard kindly said, I'm Corey Dukes. I help lead Protect Democracy's efforts to engage civil society in protecting our elections, both in 2024 and well beyond. I joined Protect Democracy in 2019.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aisha Woodward, and I recently joined Protect Democracy. I lead our advocacy work around constraining executive branch overreach. Really happy to be with you all here today. So today we wanted to share an overview of a short paper that Corey and I wrote with our colleagues at Protect Democracy, including John Steinman. And it focuses on the concept of retaliation against private businesses by government actors. And so we're trying to aim to help business leaders like you distinguish between politics as usual and abuse of government power. And we here at Protect Democracy care about this because using government power to target and retaliate against businesses for expressed viewpoints is a known sign of democratic decline. These kinds of attacks can create a permission structure for other political leaders to copy that behavior and can result in a chilling effect on free speech and expression.
So before we dive in, let's take just a quick second to ground ourselves as a group in what should be considered normal behavior and the behavior that we've witnessed through our time on the planet and our time in the United States up until recently. One, it is common and is normative for businesses and business leaders to take public policy or social positions. And those positions often reflect values that their shareholders or their employees or their customer base holds. That's all normative and totally fair. It's also common and normative for political leaders to disagree with these stances. And it's okay for political leaders to openly criticize business leaders' viewpoints. In a free society, this is all in bounds. However, we are seeing with increasing frequency something different and more troubling to folks like us at Protect Democracy. We're seeing officials at all levels of government using powers of the state to target private companies for either real or perceived expressions of viewpoints. This is not a new tactic, especially when you view it in like a global context, but the frequency and the intensity with which we're seeing it used in the United States has accelerated greatly since the Trump administration and now has become a regular feature of our political environment. Importantly, what we've seen in the last few years too is that no company is too big or too small to avoid being in the crosshairs. But how can business leaders discern when behavior might cross an invisible line? It's not easy, but it's a topic that we at Protect Democracy have spent years thinking about as an organization. And what we've attempted to do here and what we're sharing with you today is what we think is a simple set of questions that can provide a framework that can help companies start to identify risk in this area.
Before we get into that framework, let's just get a little bit more precise about what we're talking about. So here in our presentation and in our draft brief, we did a little bit of level setting to help everyone start from a shared understanding of what we are talking about when we talk about an abuse of power, because I'm sure it can feel like politicians are constantly getting involved in the matters of private companies. So we see these threats, these abuses of power, taking three primary forms. The first is rhetorical threats. And what we mean by that is that in response to disfavored speech or expression, a government official threatens government action or seeks to chill speech. An example of this might be Senator Mitch McConnell in 2021 warned businesses very publicly that they would face what he called serious consequences if they spoke out against a new voting rights law in Georgia. And he was very explicit in urging corporate America to, quote, stay out of politics. Now, this wasn't a specific threat, but it was, I will do X, but it was very clearly an implied threat that the government might take action against companies that were exercising free speech rights that he disagreed with. The second category is administrative threats. And so by this, we mean threatened use of executive branch agency power or investigative power to retaliate against disfavored speech. Example you all may be familiar with this is earlier this year, California Governor Gavin Newsom announced that he would refuse to renew a state contract with Walgreens over the company's decision to halt sales of the abortion pill mifepristone. Now, at the time, Walgreens was characterizing its decision as risk management, not political speech. It was concerned about lawsuits from state AGs. But Newsom's threat, which he did later walk back, is a good example of how government officials can deploy specific administrative tools of the state, like purchasing power, contracting power, as a level of influence over private companies, even in cases like this where the speech was sort of in the eye of the beholder. Finally, we would talk about legislative threats. So this is the targeted use of legislation, lawmaking, and legislatures' investigatory powers. An example of this might be in 2018, the Georgia state legislature voted to strip out of a larger bill a proposed tax exemption for jet fuel, which was originally intended to benefit Delta Airlines, in retaliation for the company's decision to eliminate a promotional discount for NRA members. This was following the school shooting in Parkland, Florida. So we just gave you some examples of how government power can be wielded, but it certainly can still be difficult in practice to distinguish what we're talking about. And so to help parse those differences, we developed a set of 4 questions that we think businesses might be able to use to help assess risk in specific instances. So Corey and I will take each of these questions in turn.
So the first question, is the government action intended to further a legitimate public policy purpose, or is it meant to punish speech or expression? We'll briefly unpack this with the federal example. So it would not be unusual if a president were to announce that his or her administration, will prioritize federal grants to businesses that commit to paying workers a living wage. This is an example of legitimate use of government power to advance public policy goals without regard to the political affiliation or values of an individual business. Businesses holding a variety of values can pay their workers a certain wage, independent of those values. On the other hand, consider if a presidential administration were to decide to blacklist or rhetorically attack businesses that donate to their opponent or to an opposing political party. This would be an abuse of power. The punishment is happening because the company is expressing a lawful right or a lawful set of political views.
The next question we would ask is, given their position of authority, can the public official make good on the threatened government action? So, for example, think about a state legislator who might be upset with a local small business that participated and supported very publicly Pride Week. If that state legislator said, I think that this small business's federal small business contract or grant should be taken away from them, that might carry different weight given it's a state legislator than if that type of threat was coming from an actual federal SBA political appointee or even the president. So we think about placing government actors on a continuum relative to the threat they're making, and that it's worth weighing kind of how close are they able to effectuate the threat to assess the risk it really may present.
The third question in our framework is the actual or threatened government action targeted at an individual company or business, or is it more applicable to a broader industry or business community that might hold a diverse set of views? This is an interesting one because it can be hard to spot. And as we go through these questions, like there's murkiness and it's not a bright line, it's a continuum. As many in this forum are really well aware, legislatures will routinely use government benefits to incentivize corporate behavior that would further a government's overarching public policy goals. So, for example, creating a tax deduction to encourage clean energy development. That type of power stands in contrast to something like a decision to remove a benefit that accrues to a single company or to a narrow section of industry in response to its perceived or actual viewpoints. A pretty high-profile example of that type of behavior is the Florida legislature's recent targeting of Disney's monorail system. That targeting was through innocuous, carefully worded language in state legislation in a transportation bill that did not mention Disney by name at all, but the language itself could only apply to Disney.
The last question we propose asking is, what is the overall context within which the government official is taking or threatening this action? And is it part of a pattern of behavior aimed at silencing dissent? To go with Florida again, another example of this is earlier this year, Governor Ron DeSantis directed the Florida State Pension Manager to consider taking legal action against Anheuser-Busch, which he had claimed had breached its duties to its shareholders by entering into a partnership with a transgender influencer that subsequently generated some public controversy and may have influenced the company's revenue. Now, viewed in a vacuum, the language that the governor was using has a valence of legitimate public policy purpose, trying to protect the integrity of state pension funds. But of course, we all kind of know the environment in which this threat was levied, which is that it was part of the governor's kind of far-reaching campaign to target so-called woke corporations and weaponize government power to punish opposing viewpoints. So in this case, it's not really a case of a one-off situation, but part of a more concerted campaign. And I would take this opportunity to also just note, since we've mentioned the Florida governor and Florida a couple of times, that Protect Democracy has filed a suit against Governor DeSantis's Stop Woke Act, HB 7. Many of you may be familiar with this. The law claims to fight back against woke indoctrination by restricting how conversations about race and gender can take place at colleges or in workplaces, and bars certain types of workplace discussion. Now, our view is that that law was pretty explicitly designed to punish business owners that engage in conversations about topics that Florida officials don't like, and think it's a pretty clear and direct affront on constitutionally protected rights.
As we digest this information, it is fair to ask, what do we do? Why does this matter? As I had mentioned at the top, we spend a lot of time at Protect Democracy thinking about issues of government power. For this project, we also consulted directly with and leaned heavily on the expertise of corporate executives, leaders in business academia, some of whom are here today, and advocates like the good folks at BFA, our friends at Leadership Now Project, Public-Private Strategies, and other organizations doing really good advocacy work in this space across a broad range of topics. Using government power to squash dissenting views is a key tactic used by political leaders looking to consolidate or aggrandize their own political power. It's an indicator of democratic decline, as Aisha mentioned earlier. When this behavior is trained on a single company or on a narrow slice of industry, punishing businesses for expressing viewpoints can and does have a chilling effect on customers, employees, competing businesses, and local economies. It will undermine the role businesses can play in a healthy democratic society. And if left unchecked, this type of behavior can create a permission structure for others in power to do the same, fostering corruption, cronyism, and regulatory uncertainty that destabilizes business climates and undermines free markets. Our boss, Ian Basson, uses the term autocratic capture to discuss that type of behavior, and others from Levitsky and Ziblatt to Timothy Snyder to many others have made the same kind of categorization. Aisha and I, we aren't here to prescribe particular actions that you all should take. You might have noticed that this conversation has been pretty clear of that, but we do think that we can help folks work through some of these topics and think through some of these topics. And we would definitely encourage folks to reach out to us at Protect Democracy. You can reach me, Corey.Dukes, first name, last name at Protect Democracy. Aisha Woodward's the same. And we'd love to talk to you to hear how you're thinking about this stuff, to discuss the topic of authoritarian capture more broadly, and hopefully to find ways where we can have common defense and common action moving forward. With that, I will hand it back to Chip.
Great. Thank you so much, Corey and Aisha. Really fascinating. And thank you for putting the links into the chat. We will be sharing both the links to download our report as well as the links to the Protect Democracy work and a follow-up email to all registrants tomorrow. We only have a few minutes left, so I was just wondering maybe we could answer a couple of the questions in the Q&A. I'm really interested to hear from the group about Marilyn's question, which is, what is the benefit to politicians to attacking businesses? Why do you see the attacks on business viewpoints and policies, since doing so can impact the health to local, state, and national economy? So I'd like to just ask the group who would have an opinion around, what is the motivation behind the attacks that some of these politicians are making?
I'll offer a thought on that, Chip. I think that, certain elected officials sort of have somehow divorced in their mind the impact of an attack on business as an employer and the benefits that company brings to a given community from their much narrower political agenda. But their political agenda, is the most important thing on their mind. And as you said earlier, if there can be political points scored with a cross-section of the public, that takes precedent. And the other thought I have is that, at the stage of our economy, there is, people are looking for targets, and businesses, particularly large companies, who are promoting a certain level of progress in our society, those run into the crosshairs of cultural strife, and so they're an easy target to go after.
Great. Well, we are coming up right on the 45-minute mark, which is what we promised. So just a reminder to go to bfa.us/backlash, and you can download the executive summary that we have written with all the data that I took you through earlier. As I said, we'll also be sending out a note to everybody that registered with a link to this. We're going to be publishing a video that captures the webinar in its entirety. And you'll also see some thought pieces coming out from Business for America over the course of the next few weeks that highlight some of these data points and really lend a bit more context as to why this is such an issue and why companies really need to think about how they're going to prepare for a quite tumultuous 2024. So with that, thank you so much, everybody. It's been a pleasure moderating this, and thank you to our friends at Protect Democracy for joining us today, and we wish everybody a great rest of your week.